Across 17,000 star systems, spanning 4 major galactic arms and approximately 600 civilized species, there existed a universal truth that nobody questioned. Predators ate prey. This wasn't philosophy. This wasn't open to interpretation. This was biology, taxonomy. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. And the fundamental organizing principle that kept the Interspecies Research Collective from descending into complete administrative chaos. Every species got cataloged. Every species got assigned a threat classification. Herbivores went in one database, carnivores in another, omnivores got their own complicated subcategory that required 3 different forms and a committee review. The system worked beautifully for approximately 11,000 years. Then humans showed up and immediately made everyone's job significantly more difficult. Research station Kepler 440b orbited a fairly unremarkable moon in a fairly unremarkable system, conducting fairly unremarkable studies on extremophile bacteria that could survive in sulfuric conditions. The station housed 47 researchers from 11 different species, all of whom had learned to coexist with reasonable professionalism. The Centaurians kept their humidity requirements to their own quarters. The Draxon maintained their preferred methane mix in the engineering bay, and everybody agreed to use the standardized atmospheric blend in common areas. The human had arrived 6 months ago as part of a personnel exchange program. Single specimen, mid-range size for their species, classification, omnivore with persistence, hunter ancestry. Threat assessment, moderate. Social compatibility, surprisingly high, despite originating from a death world with frankly excessive gravitational force and an atmosphere that would corrode most species' respiratory systems within minutes. What the files didn't mention was that humans possessed an apparently genetic inability to follow basic biological protocols. Commander Thexilor, a Vryn with excellent administrative records and an unfortunate tendency toward anxiety disorders, was reviewing mineral composition reports when his communication panel exploded with alerts. Not metaphorically. The actual priority klaxon started howling. The emergency lights began strobing, and his screen filled with red text so aggressive, it practically leaped off the display and slapped him across his sensory stalks. Biological threat detected. Predator species in residential sector. Immediate response required. His secondary heart did an uncomfortable flip. Predator species? On the station. They had exactly 3 approved predator species on Kepler 440b, all of them fully sapient, all of them on strict dietary supplements, and absolutely none of them classified at a threat level that should trigger this kind of response. He pulled up the detailed sensor readout, and his primary heart joined his secondary in the gymnastics routine. Species identification: Carthax ravager, juvenile, quantity 3. Current location: Residential Unit 17C, proximity to prey. Species 0.2 meters. Threat: Status: critical, Carthax ravagers. Actual legitimate apex predators from a world where evolution had apparently decided that every organism needed to be capable of killing every other organism just for practice. They weren't sapient, they weren't domesticable, and they certainly weren't supposed to be anywhere near a research station without 6 layers of containment and a hazmat team on standby. And they were in the residential sector, near a prey species. Thexilor triggered the emergency response protocol and grabbed his communicator with 2 of his limbs, while frantically typing with the other 3. Residential Unit 17 to C. That was. He pulled up the housing assignments, dreading what he'd find. The human. Of course it was the human. Within 90 seconds, the security team assembled outside the human's quarters. Chief Security Officer Catherine, a Borlaxian whose species evolved from ambush predators and who therefore possessed excellent tactical instincts, held up 3 of her 4 hands for silence. "Status," she whispered into her comm. The station's AI responded in its perpetually calm voice. that made every crisis sound like a mild scheduling inconvenience. 3 Carthax Ravager cubs detected in Residential Unit 17C, 1 human occupant. Biological readings indicate all organisms are in rest state. Predator stress hormones, minimal. Prey stress hormones, minimal. This data profile is inconsistent with known predator-prey encounters. Inconsistent how? Catherine demanded. In every documented case of Carthax Ravager proximity to prey species, prey stress hormones increase by 400 to 700%. Prey organisms typically exhibit flight response, defensive posturing, or rapid cardiovascular failure. Current human readings show normal sleep state hormone levels, slightly elevated REM activity, and a 22% increase in endorphins. Catherine looked at her team. Her team looked back. Nobody wanted to say it. Finally, Junior Officer Plixin, a Centaurian whose species had been prey animals for most of their evolutionary history, voiced what they were all thinking. The human is experiencing pleasure chemicals while sleeping next to apex predators. That is correct. Is the human drugged, compromised, under some form of mind control? Negative. All readings are consistent with normal human sleep patterns documented over the past 6 months of habitation. Catherine made a decision. We go in carefully. Weapons on stun, lowest setting. We do not provoke the Ravagers. We extract the human if possible. If the human is already deceased, we retreat and contain the predators by sealing the unit. The team nodded. Someone should probably have asked why Carthax Ravagers, which required import licenses from 3 different galactic agencies and cost approximately the same as a small shuttle, were inside a residential unit on a remote research station. Someone should probably have questioned why the human wasn't currently being digested. Someone should definitely have wondered why the sensors kept insisting that the predators were in a rest state rather than a feeding state. But security teams didn't get paid to philosophize. They got paid to respond to crises, and 3 juvenile apex predators sleeping near a registered omnivore definitely qualified as a crisis. Catherine overrode the door lock with her command codes. The panel beeped softly, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. The team moved in with practiced coordination, weapons raised, positioning themselves for optimal sight lines while maintaining safe distance from one another. The residential unit was dark except for the faint glow of a datapad left on the desk and the ambient light filtering in from the corridor. Standard human quarters. Too warm by Catherine's standards, slightly humid, with that odd mixture of sterile station air and organic scents that all humans seem to carry with them. Something chemical, something biological, something that Catherine's threat assessment instincts classified as unpredictable. And there, on the human sleeping platform, visible in the dim light, were the Ravagers. 3 of them. Cubs, yes, but Carthax Ravagers matured quickly, and even juveniles possessed claws that could shred through standard station hull plating, and jaws capable of crushing bone from approximately 40 different species' skeletal structures. Their scaled hides shimmered with that distinctive iridescent pattern that helped them blend into the crystalline forests of their homeworld. Each one massed approximately 30 kilograms, all muscle and instinct and biological murder efficiency. They were, according to every piece of training Catherine had ever received, supposed to be in a hunting posture or a feeding posture, or at minimum a threat assessment posture. Instead, they were curled up like... Catherine didn't have a reference point. Like prey animals seeking warmth. Like pack creatures demonstrating social bonding. Like something that made absolutely no taxonomic sense whatsoever. And in the middle of this biological impossibility, completely relaxed, breathing in the steady rhythm of deep sleep, was the human. One of the Ravagers had its head resting on the human's chest. Another was curled against the human's side, one clawed paw draped across the human's arm in what would have been an affectionate gesture if Ravagers were capable of affection, which they absolutely were not, according to every xenobiological database in the collective. The third was nestled near the human's feet, its tail wrapped around the human's ankle. They were sleeping. All of them. Predator and prey, stacked together like some kind of deranged evolutionary experiment, looking for all the galaxy like they did this every single night. Plixin made a small, distressed sound that his species produced when confronting something that violated their understanding of reality. Catherine couldn't blame him. She was a trained security professional with 15 years of experience, and her brain was currently trying to process the scene by simply refusing to believe her own visual input. "Station AI," she whispered into her comm. "Confirm visual. Are we actually seeing what we're seeing?" Confirmed. 1 human, 3 Carthax Ravager cubs in shared rest state. Physical contact between all organisms, no signs of distress or aggression. How is this possible? Insufficient data to formulate hypothesis. One of the Ravagers stirred slightly, making a sound that their species typically used when communicating contentment during feeding. Except there was no feeding happening. The human remained entirely intact, uninjured, breathing steadily. The Ravager's eyes opened. Predator eyes designed to track movement in low light, to identify prey at distance, to calculate attack vectors with ruthless precision. Those eyes focused on Catherine and her team. Every weapon raised simultaneously. Catherine prepared to give the order to fire, to extract the human, to do something that aligned with her training and experience and basic understanding of how biology worked. The Ravager looked at them, looked at the sleeping human, and made a soft chirping sound that translated roughly to, "Go away, you're disturbing the warm thing." Then it closed its eyes and went back to sleep. Catherine stood in the doorway of a human's quarters, watching apex predators cuddle with their designated prey, and realized that the universe had just stopped making sense. This, she suspected, was going to require a significant amount of paperwork. Catherine had handled station emergencies before. Equipment malfunctions, atmospheric breaches, that memorable incident where a Centaurian scientist accidentally created a small temporal loop in Laboratory 7. Standard crisis management involved identifying the problem, implementing the solution, filing the reports, and moving on with life. This situation offered no clear problem identification, no obvious solution, and would probably require reports that hadn't been invented yet. She kept her weapon trained on the sleeping pile of biological impossibility, while mentally composing the message she'd have to send to Commander Thexilor. "Sir, the predators are cuddling the human." Didn't seem sufficiently professional. "Sir, we've discovered that everything we know about predator-prey dynamics is apparently optional." Seemed too philosophical. "Should we do something?" Plixin whispered, his voice carrying that particular frequency that Centaurians used when their threat avoidance instincts were screaming contradictory instructions. Before Catherine could formulate a response that didn't involve admitting she had absolutely no idea what protocol applied here, the human stirred. Not violently, not with the jerking panic of someone realizing they'd been sleeping next to creatures designed by evolution to end other creatures. Just a gentle shift. The kind of movement that suggested consciousness returning naturally. The human's hand, still mostly asleep, reached over and scratched one of the Ravagers behind its auditory ridge. The creature made a rumbling sound that resembled a Carthax threat display, but somehow came across as pleased, possibly because its eyes remained closed and its claws stayed retracted, and absolutely nothing about its body language suggested preparing to disembowel nearby organisms. Catherine's threat assessment training, honed over years of security work, finally gave up entirely and took an early retirement. The human's eyes opened, looked at the security team, looked at the weapons, looked at the Ravagers still sleeping peacefully against various parts of their anatomy. The human's face did something complicated that Catherine's cultural database identified as confused recognition followed by exasperation. "Oh," the human said, voice rough with sleep. "Let me guess, the sensors freaked out again." "Again?" "Do not move," Catherine commanded, keeping her voice level and authoritative. "We are here to extract you from a hostile predator situation." The human looked down at the Ravager using their chest as a pillow. "Hostile? These guys, they're babies." "Those," Catherine said slowly, "are Carthax Ravagers, apex predators. Class 7 biological threats. They are currently in physical contact with you, a registered omnivore, which by every known taxonomic standard makes you prey. Sure, if you want to get technical about it. The human yawned, carefully extracting themselves from under 30 kilograms of sleeping predator without waking the creature. The ravager grumbled, readjusted itself, and continued sleeping. But they're also orphans. Found them in the cargo bay 3 weeks ago. Someone must have smuggled them on station and then abandoned them when they got too big to hide. 3 weeks. The human had been sleeping next to apex predators for 3 weeks, and nobody had noticed because apparently humans just did these things and expected the universe to adjust accordingly. You found 3 Carthax Ravager cubs, Catherine said, her training manual currently burning itself to ashes somewhere in her memory. And your response was to adopt them? Well, I couldn't just leave them there. They were scared and hungry. The human stood up, stretching, apparently unconcerned that they were having this conversation in their sleeping garments while surrounded by armed security and apex predators. Look, I know this probably seems weird by your standards, but where I come from, this is pretty normal. We've been domesticating predators for thousands of years. Domesticating, Catherine repeated. Carthax Ravagers are not domesticable. Their neural structure lacks the capacity for bonding with other species. This is established xenobiological fact. The human walked over to the smallest of the cubs, the one sleeping near the foot of the bed, and gently rubbed its scaled head. The creature opened one eye, recognized the human, made that pleased rumbling sound again, and went back to sleep. You might want to update your xenobiological facts, the human said, because these 3 seem pretty bonded to me. Catherine realized she was going to need to call in the station's xenobiologist, and probably the medical team, and possibly a philosopher, because watching a human casually pet an apex predator while discussing domestication theory was causing her to question fundamental aspects of reality. Station AI, she said into her comm, maintaining visual contact with the impossible scene before her. Request immediate presence of Dr. Venix in Residential Unit 17C. Priority code. What in the name of every documented species is happening here? That is not a recognized priority code, the AI responded. It is now. Dr. Venix arrived within 4 minutes, which was impressive considering her species required a specialized mobility apparatus to navigate station corridors. The Pelian xenobiologist had 3 doctoral degrees, 2 honorary research positions, and a reputation for being spectacularly difficult to surprise. She took one look at the scene in the residential unit, made a whistling sound that her translator rendered as, well, that's academically inconvenient, and immediately began scanning the Ravagers with her portable analysis equipment. How long has this been occurring? She asked, her mechanical limbs moving in precise patterns as she collected data. 3 weeks, apparently, Catherine replied, still maintaining her position by the door as though her presence somehow imposed order on this chaos. The human claims to have found them as abandoned cubs and simply decided to keep them. Simply decided, Venix repeated, her vocal harmonics suggesting deep skepticism. To keep 3 organisms whose species is renowned for attacking anything that moves, including other Carthax Ravagers, and this human thought. What? They would make acceptable companions. The human, now sitting on the edge of the sleeping platform and looking remarkably unbothered by having this conversation at what the station chronometer indicated was 3 in the morning, shrugged. They were babies. Babies need taking care of. It's not complicated. It is extraordinarily complicated, Venix countered, studying her scanner readings with increasing agitation. Carthax Ravagers imprint on prey signatures during their juvenile phase to establish optimal hunting patterns. Being in proximity to a potential prey species should trigger predatory instinct development, not bonding behavior. Yet according to these readings, all 3 cubs are exhibiting neurochemical patterns consistent with pack bonding. With you, a different species entirely. Maybe your data on Ravagers is incomplete, the human suggested. Our data spans 400 years of observation, including. controlled studies with 17 different potential prey species. In every single case, the ravagers attempted to eat the prey. Every case, no exceptions, until apparently now. One of the cubs woke up, noticed the crowd of strangers in the room, and made a sound that the translator couldn't quite process. It climbed off the sleeping platform and moved toward the human, positioning itself between the newcomers and its adopted caretaker. A defensive posture, Catherine noted, protecting the human from them. A predator protecting its prey. The security manual was definitely having an existential crisis. Fascinating, Venix murmured, her scanners working overtime. The cub perceives you as part of its pack structure. It's defending you. This shouldn't be neurologically possible with their brain architecture. But it's happening anyway, the human pointed out, reaching down to reassure the cub with a gentle touch. The ravager relaxed immediately, its aggressive posture dissolving into something that resembled trust. Venix made several rapid notes on her data tablet, her manipulator limbs moving in patterns that suggested extreme academic distress. I need to contact the Xenobiological Council. This represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of predator development. We may need to completely revise the classification system. Or, the human offered, you could just accept that sometimes animals are more flexible than your categories allow for. Scientifically unacceptable response, but accurate. Catherine watched the xenobiologist and the human engage in what was technically a debate, but felt more like two individuals speaking entirely different languages while using the same words. The cubs, meanwhile, had gone back to sleep, completely unconcerned that their existence was causing a minor crisis in galactic biological taxonomy. Commander Thexilor's voice crackled through Catherine's communicator. Security Chief, what is your status? Do we need to implement containment protocols? Catherine looked at the sleeping predators, at the human sitting calmly among them, at the xenobiologist frantically revising centuries of established research. Sir, she said slowly, I recommend we implement the protocol for situations where humans are involved and nothing makes sense anymore. We don't have that protocol. Then I suggest we create one. By morning station time, everyone on Kepler 440b knew about the Ravagers. News traveled fast in a research facility where the most exciting event in recent memory had been a particularly vibrant fungal bloom in the hydroponics bay. 3 apex predators living in residential quarters with a human who treated them like household companions. That was gossip fuel for at least 6 months. Commander Thexilor sat in his office, staring at the official incident report that Catherine had submitted. The document was thorough, professional, and completely useless for determining what actual policies should be implemented. His secondary heart was doing that uncomfortable flutter thing again. Let me understand this correctly, he said to the human, who stood in front of his desk looking appropriately apologetic, but not nearly concerned enough for someone who'd been harboring illegal predators. You found 3 Carthax Ravager cubs 3 weeks ago. You brought them to your quarters. You fed them, you slept beside them, and at no point did you think this warranted informing Station Command? I didn't want them to get confiscated, the human admitted. They're just babies. They needed someone to take care of them. They are Class 7 biological threats. They're cubs who were scared and alone. Thexilor felt a migraine developing across his sensory stalks. The regulations are exceptionally clear about unauthorized life forms on research stations. The penalties include immediate termination of contract, criminal charges, and potential deportation. The human nodded, accepting this. I understand, but I couldn't just let them die. And there it was, that peculiar human quality that made them simultaneously excellent colleagues and absolute administrative nightmares. They possessed this baffling tendency to prioritize emotional impulses over logical regulations. And somehow it worked out more often than it had any right to. Thexilor pulled up the messages that had been flooding his communication panel since dawn. The Xenobiological Council wanted to send a research team. The Interspecies Ethics Committee wanted to file 17 different inquiries. The station's legal department wanted clarification on whether the Ravagers counted as pets, research subjects, or security threats. And then there was the message from Station Environmental Services, reporting that they discovered why the atmospheric recyclers had been showing unusual organic matter readings. The human had apparently been smuggling raw meat from the cafeteria supply to feed the cubs for 3 weeks, without anyone noticing. Dr. Venix has submitted a proposal, Thexilor said, pulling up the document. She wants to study the cubs. Formal research observation with you as the primary handler. It would legitimize their presence on station and provide valuable data about predator behavioral plasticity. The human's expression brightened. So they can stay? Under strict conditions. Monitoring equipment in your quarters. Regular behavioral assessments. And if they show any signs of aggression toward other crew members, they get transferred to a proper containment facility. Immediately. No arguments. They won't be aggressive. They're good cubs. Thexilor sincerely doubted that apex predators could be categorized as good. But he was learning that human definitions of these things operated on completely different parameters than the rest of the galaxy used. Over the following weeks, the station adjusted to its new residents with the grudging acceptance that came from realizing the situation wasn't going to change regardless of personal opinions. The cubs grew. They followed the human around during off-duty hours. They learned to recognize other crew members as non-threatening, though several researchers reported feeling deeply unsettled by having Carthax Ravagers watch them with intelligent, calculating eyes. Dr. Venix published her preliminary findings, which immediately caused controversy in academic circles across 3 star systems. Other researchers began reporting similar observations from stations with human personnel. Apparently, this wasn't an isolated incident. Humans everywhere were befriending, adopting, or otherwise forming inappropriate bonds with species that should have eaten them. There was the human on Station Tarsus, who'd somehow trained a Vrelian cave serpent to fetch tools. The human on the merchant vessel Prosperity, who kept a pack of thornback hunters as what they called emotional support animals. The human researcher on Kepler 186F, who'd taught a colony of parasitic mindworms to perform tricks in exchange for treats, which was both impressive and deeply horrifying. Catherine found the human in the common area one evening. The 3 Ravagers lounging nearby while their caretaker ate dinner. Synthetic protein paste, the standard station fare that every species complained about despite it being nutritionally optimized. You know, Catherine said, settling into a nearby seat, my species spent millions of years as ambush predators. We understand the hunting instinct. But what you've done with those cubs, that's not just unusual, it's unprecedented. The human looked at the Ravagers, who were currently engaged in what appeared to be a play-fighting session that would have looked like Mortal Kombat to anyone unfamiliar with their behavior. On my world, we have a saying, not all strength is shown through teeth and claws. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to be gentle. Catherine considered this. Your world sounds dangerous and confusing. It is, the human agreed cheerfully, but it's home. The Ravagers finished their play session and settled down near the human's feet, content and peaceful and completely undermining 11,000 years of established biological classification. Somewhere, a database was being rewritten. Somewhere, scientists were arguing about taxonomy. Somewhere, regulations were being revised to account for the fact that humans simply refused to follow the rules that governed every other species. And on Research Station Kepler 440b, 3 apex predators slept beside their human, and the sensors had finally stopped flagging it as an emergency. Progress, Thexilor supposed, came in strange forms. The galaxy spent millennia perfecting its classification systems, establishing boundaries between predator and prey, creating rules that governed every interaction between species. Then humanity arrived and promptly ignored all of it, choosing compassion over protocol, instinct over regulation. They befriended creatures designed to kill them, domesticated the undomesticable, and somehow made it work through sheer stubborn affection. The Interspecies Research Collective eventually created a new category in their databases: human-adjacent life forms, behavioral patterns inconsistent with species norms. It required its own department. 3 humans got hired to run it. They immediately adopted the office plants.